In the year 2000, Saddam Hussein did something interesting. He did not test a new weapon. He did not threaten a neighboring country. He did something that seems, on the surface, completely harmless. He announced that Iraq would stop selling its oil in US dollars. Instead, Iraq would sell its oil in euros, the currency used in Europe. That is it. That was the move. A currency switch. And to most people reading the news that day, it probably sounded like a boring accounting decision that had nothing to do with their lives. But to the people who understand how the global financial system actually works, it was one of the most dangerous things a world leader could do. 3 years later, in 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. But here is what almost nobody mentions in the history books. Within weeks of the U.S. military taking control of Iraqi oil fields, the oil sales were quietly switched back to U.S. dollars. To understand why that detail matters, and why the exact same story is happening right now in 2026 on a much bigger scale, you need to understand one of the most important financial arrangements in modern history. It is called the Petrodollar system. And once you understand it, the world starts to look very different. Let us go back to 1971. At that time, every US dollar in existence was backed by gold. That meant if you held a dollars, you could theoretically walk into a bank and exchange it for a fixed amount of physical gold. This gave the dollar real, tangible value and made it trustworthy worldwide. But in 1971, President Richard Nixon did something dramatic. He closed what was called the gold window. He announced that the dollar would no longer be exchangeable for gold. Just like that, the world's most important currency became backed by nothing physical at all, just a promise. And the rest of the world had a very reasonable question. Why should we trust dollars if they are not backed by anything? America needed a new answer, and the answer they came up with changed everything. In 1974, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia, and the two countries made a deal. Here is what the deal said. Saudi Arabia, at that time the most powerful oil producer on earth, agreed to do two things. First, sell all of its oil exclusively in US dollars. No other currency. Only dollars. Second, take all the extra dollars they earned from selling oil and invest that money into US government bonds, basically lending it back to the United States. In exchange, America promised Saudi Arabia military protection and a supply of advanced weapons. That deal became known as the Petrodollar system, and it was pure genius. Here is why. Every country on Earth needs oil to run cars, factories, planes, and electricity. And now the only way to buy that oil was to first get US dollars, which meant every country on Earth suddenly needed to hold dollars at all times, which meant artificial global demand for the dollar was created overnight, which meant America could print money and borrow at cheap rates because the whole world would always need dollars. It was described by economists as the exorbitant privilege, the greatest financial superpower in history, and almost nobody outside of government knew it existed. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by oil, and America controlled the oil trade. Now here is where Saddam Hussein walks back into the story. By the year 2000, Iraq was the second largest oil producer in OPEC, and Saddam, who despised American influence in the Middle East, understood exactly how the petrodollar system worked. He knew that the dollar's power came from one simple rule. Oil must be sold in dollars, so he broke the rule. He announced Iraq would sell oil in euros. It was a direct attack, not with missiles, but with a currency switch. If other countries followed Iraq's lead and started selling oil in euros, or in any other currency, the global demand for dollars would start to shrink. And if demand for dollars shrinks, America loses its ability to borrow cheaply, print freely, and project financial power across the entire world. It would be the slow unraveling of the most valuable financial privilege ever constructed. 3 years after that announcement, Iraq was invaded. Its oil was switched back to dollars, and Saddam Hussein was dead. Now, maybe that is all a coincidence. Maybe the weapons of mass destruction story was completely true and the currency switch had nothing to do with it. History is complicated and reasonable people can disagree about the causes of that war, but the financial facts of what happened before and after are not in dispute. And the reason this story matters so much today is that the same switch Saddam attempted in 2000 with one country is now being attempted by dozens of countries simultaneously, and America cannot invade all of them. Here is what is happening right now in 2026. Saudi Arabia, the very country that created the petrodollar system in 1974, quietly let its 50-year agreement with the United States expire. No dramatic announcement, no press conference, just silence. In 2023, Saudi Arabia completed its first ever oil transaction with China paid in Chinese yuan, not dollars. India is now settling purchases of Russian crude oil in Chinese yuan and UAE dirhams, completely bypassing the dollar. Iran, currently in military conflict with the United States over the Strait of Hormuz, has begun charging yuan-denominated fees for oil tankers passing through the strait, the same waterway that carries 20% of the world's oil supply. China has built an entire alternative financial system called CIPS, the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, which processed the equivalent of $245 trillion worth of yuan transactions in 2025 alone. And BRICS, a group that now includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, representing roughly 45% of the world's population, is actively building new payment systems designed to trade without dollars. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has already fallen from 73% in the year 2000, when Saddam made his move, to just 57.7% today. That is a 16-point drop in 25 years. Slow, quiet, exactly the way these things always happen. Here is the simple version of why all of this matters to you personally, wherever you live. The petrodollar system is the reason America has been able to run enormous debts without a financial crisis. It is the reason the US can print money without immediate inflation the way other countries would experience it. It is the reason American consumers have enjoyed decades of cheap imports and low interest rates. It is the hidden subsidy that makes the American standard of living possible at the scale it exists. If the demand for dollars declines, if oil is traded in yuan, euros, rupees, dirhams, that subsidy shrinks. Borrowing becomes more expensive. Inflation becomes harder to control. The national debt becomes more dangerous. None of that happens overnight, but it is already happening slowly, exactly the way it happened to the British pound after World War II. Not a dramatic crash, but a long, quiet reduction in influence until one day it was simply no longer the center of the world. And right now, in 2026, every single indicator that tracks dollar dominance is pointing in the same direction, down. So here is the question I want you to answer in the comments. Do you think the petrodollar system can survive this wave of countries moving away from it? Or do you think Saddam Hussein was just the first one to see clearly what many others are now acting on? Because the answer to that question determines the future of every dollar-denominated asset you own.